The supposed hauntings at 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville during the 1970s have inspired 10 books and more than 35 films. But what is the true story behind it? Hi guys, I hope you're doing really well. My name is Sarah and welcome to What the Horror, the channel where we talk about horror movies old and new. Also, welcome to a new episode of Truly Horror, the series where we talk about the true stories, the true events, and true crimes surrounding certain horror movies. The behind-the-scenes stuff that is often stranger and scarier than the movies themselves. Today we are taking a look at the true events that inspired the horrors of 1979's The Amityville Horror, the 2005 remake also entitled The Amityville Horror, and The Conjuring 2 from 2016. As I mentioned in the opening, there is an extensive list of media that is based off of or inspired by the DeFeos and the Lutz families. However, the sequels in the original series, due to ongoing lawsuits, changed names, identities, and references to certain events, and the majority of the subsequent films that were released have no actual link to the families, instead only using the name Amityville in their title or having the film's hauntings based around items that used to be in the Ocean Avenue house. With all of this in mind, this episode will only focus on the events depicted in the 1979 original and the 2005 remake, and the opening scene of The Conjuring 2. I also want to state, as I always do in these truly horror episodes, especially ones based around hauntings or that of a paranormal nature, that when I say the true events, I obviously mean that term very, very loosely. These episodes are not for me to judge or claim whether or not these events really took place. These are not my opinions. Instead, they are to look at the evidence, eyewitness accounts of, or opinions of people who were involved in the events. To look at what it was that inspired the fictional portrayals in the movies. And as always with Truly Horror, this episode will be broken down into differing sections. We will look at the DeFeo murders and trial, the Lutz family and the hauntings, the current status of the house, and finally the involvement of Ed and Lorraine Warren. And for each of these sections, we'll start by looking at the film portrayal and then the real versions. The Amityville Horror 1979 opens on a stormy night, and we hear multiple gunshots ring out at the address of 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville, Long Island. In the early hours of the morning at 3:15 a.m. on November 13th, 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. kills his family, his mother, father, and 4 younger siblings, and as the text on the screen tells us, at the time there is no apparent reason. During the trial, 20-year-old Ronald claimed to have heard voices in the house, and that it was the voices that told him to kill his family. The Amityville Horror remake adds slightly more information on Ronald DeFeo, who is referred to as Ronnie here. Most of the basic information remains the same. The deaths took place on November 13th, 1974 at 3:15 a.m, but this time the address has been changed to 412 Ocean Avenue instead of 112 Ocean Avenue. According to the remake, the DeFeo family had only recently moved into the house, and Ronnie, who was 23 years old at the time, another difference from the original, had moved down into the basement. On the 28th day of the family living there, Ronnie loaded a shotgun and walked from room to room, killing his family. He killed 5 of them while they lay asleep in bed, and the 6th one, his younger sister Jodie, in her bedroom closet. Ronnie was then held in protective custody, and at his trial he claimed he heard voices in the house who possessed him to kill his family. Another additional piece of information in the remake is provided by the babysitter Lisa, who also used to babysit for the DeFeos. She tells brothers Michael and Billy Lutz that Ronnie had become paranoid. He at first thought his dog was out to get him, so he killed it, and then he thought his family were demons, and that's why he killed them. In The Conjuring 2's opening scene, Ronnie DeFeo is only mentioned in passing during a narration from Lorraine Warren, in which he states 1 year before the Lutz family moved into the Amityville house, a young man named Ronnie DeFeo had brutally killed his entire family. In the original Amityville Horror, the Lutz family buy the house 1 year after the deaths and move into the house 1 month after that. The Lutz family consists of George Lutz, his wife Kathy, and Kathy's 3 children from a previous marriage, Greg, Matt, and Amy. The events that occurred during the Lutz living there took place over 19 days. The first event happens when a Father Delaney comes to bless the house at Kathy's request. When he arrives, he is attacked by a swarm of flies and hears a looming ominous voice tell him to get out. And later that night, when he tries to call Kathy, the call won't connect and the phone burns his hand. Anyone of religion, including Father Delaney and Kathy's aunt, who happens to be a nun, becomes ill while in the house and in some cases even after they've left. On one occasion, while Father Delaney is praying for the Lutz family, he ends up losing his sight. Other events that occur are the front door and basement door being blown off the hinges from the inside, black goo rising in their sinks and toilets, Kathy waking screaming from bad dreams, a babysitter is locked in a closet by an unseen force. Daughter Amy talks of an imaginary friend she has, named Jody, who wants her to stay with her forever, and Kathy sees a pair of red eyes floating outside of Amy's bedroom window. From very early on, George's behaviour changes. He complains of it being cold all of the time. He wakes up at 3:15 a.m. each night, often to visions or after a bad dream. And as his obsession with keeping the house warm grows, he also becomes more volatile and aggressive towards his wife and the children. His obsession with the house causes his business to suffer, and he eventually discovers that he is the spitting image of Ronnie DeFeo Jr. George, along with the wife of his business partner, feel connected to the house and are drawn to a hidden red room behind a wall in the basement. And on the final day, George becomes physically violent, hitting Kathy, and then finally, later that night, hunting down the children with an axe. But before he can kill the family, he is stopped by Kathy, and the whole family, including the family dog Harry, escape from the house. Text on the screen tells us the Lutz family never reclaimed their house or their personal belongings, and that today they live in another state. In the remake, as in the original, the Lutz family buy the house 1 year after the deaths. This time, though, Kathy's children are now called Billy, Michael, and Chelsea. Like the house in the original, this one has a boathouse and a basement, but this time it is an isolated house rather than on a residential street. A priest is again attacked by a swarm of flies and hears a voice telling him to get out. But this time the priest is called Father Calloway, and he knew the DeFeos as Ronnie had come to him claiming he heard voices in his home. Father Calloway also informs Kathy Lutz that the teddy bear her daughter Chelsea is carrying around with her belonged to Jody DeFeo, and not only that, but she had been buried with it. George Lutz begins changing from day one in the remake, always complaining of the house being cold and becoming very aggressive towards the children. But in the remake, George is medically checked out with no physical issues being found. While he is away from the house, George feels fine, but while he's there, he's cruel, he's aggressive, and he's dismissive. As in the original, George wakes every night at 3:15 a.m, but this time he moves into the basement, just as the movie claims Ronnie did before him. In the remake, George also kills the family dog Harry, and is then haunted by the sound of his barking. Was there any need for the dog to die in this one? I don't think so. On the 28th day, Kathy decides to leave the house with her family, but a then fully possessed George tries to kill the whole family. It's also implied that as they try to escape, Kathy and the children are stopped by the house itself, but finally escaping on the roof, knocking George unconscious and tying him up with a rope, the Lutz family escape on their boat, with text on the screen telling us the Lutz family never returned for their personal belongings. Like with Ronnie Jr., the Lutz family are briefly mentioned in the Conjuring 2 by Lorraine's narration, saying the Lutz family fled their house in the middle of the night. In the original Amityville Horror, it is claimed that the house is built on land that was used by a tribe called the Shinnecock to abandon their mentally ill and bury their dead. as well as being the site where a man named John Ketchum had built his house. Ketchum had been run out of Salem for being a witch, and the Lutz's house was built on land affected by devil worship, death, and sacrifice. In the remake, they changed this and claimed that a preacher called Reverend Jeremiah Ketchum lived in the house, although then it was called the Sanctuary. He kept and, let's say, badly hurt, for YouTube, Native Americans in the basement of the house during the 17th century. 20 bodies had been found in the lake behind the house. Ketchum, also, in a ritual, took his own life so that his presence would remain there forever. In the opening of The Conjuring 2, we see Ed and Lorraine Warren investigating the Amityville case. The film opens in Amityville, New York in 1976. Lorraine narrates that the Lutz family fled their house in the middle of the night, and 2 months later, her and Ed became involved in the case. The Lutz family claimed the house was haunted, and the church had reached out to the Warrens to see if they could confirm this haunted activity. 1 year before the Lutzes moved in, a young man named Ronnie DeFeo had brutally killed his entire family. And the Warrens intended to find out if the killings were motivated by anger or if Ronnie had been under the influence of something demonic, as he had testified in his trial. Text tells us that Ed and Lorraine's investigation into the Amityville haunting sparked a media firestorm and catapulted them into the public eye. Lorraine tells the audience that after all they've seen, not much rattles them anymore, but this case still haunts her. The Warrens set up mics and camera with the help of their colleague Drew Thomas, hoping to find evidence of the hauntings. The Warrens hold a seance where Lorraine falls into a vision of the killings. Lorraine sees the events through Ronnie's eyes, reenacting the kills, as Ronnie walks from room to room, killing his family as they lay in bed. According to the vision, once Ronnie had killed his entire family, he woke as if from a trance, alluding to him having been possessed at the time. Lorraine is then led to the basement and has a vision of the demon Valak in the form of a nun. It is unclear, however, if Valak is the demon responsible for the events at the Amityville house, but I think we can infer this is what the film is trying to imply. Lorraine then tells Ed that this is as close to hell as she ever wants to get. Ed and Lorraine later appear on a TV show called The Becky Rivers Show to talk about the Amityville case. A fellow guest named Dr. Stephen Kaplan claims the investigation was a hoax. He claims the Lutz family made the hauntings up to profit off of the publicity. And he also accuses the Warrens of being fake. He says, quote, "Ed Warren hasn't been in a house he didn't think was haunted, and with Lorraine blowing smoke and ringing bells, they managed to convince everyone else it's haunted," unquote. While there were some variants in the portrayal of Ronnie DeFeo and the death of his family, there were a lot of the basic facts that were accurate. The killings did take place on November 13th, 1974 in Amityville, Long Island. Ronnie was 23 at the time, and he did kill his entire family: his father, Ronald Sr., his mother, Louise, his sisters Allison and Dawn, and his brothers Mark and John, with a rifle while they lay asleep in bed. But there is a lot more to the story of both Ronnie and the deaths. Ronald DeFeo Jr. was born September 26, 1951, and was the eldest of 5 children. In my research, I found numerous accounts of the DeFeo family being a, quote, nice, normal family. They were kind and religious. But I also saw reports of Ronald Sr. apparently being a domineering father and sometimes prone to angry outbursts, especially towards Ronnie Jr. Apparently, Ronnie's family had high expectations for him, which he failed to live up to. A strict father and cruel children at school who bullied him for being overweight and shy apparently led Ronnie to physically lash out. And while there are reports of the family trying to help Ronnie, including appointments with a psychiatrist that Ronnie refused to attend, nothing worked, and he was eventually kicked out of school and went down a path of alcohol and drug use. Ronnie, who was nicknamed Butch by his family, was given a job at his father's car dealership, but in October 1974, he apparently planned to fake a robbery of the dealership with his friend to steal $20,000. The police wanted to question Ronnie about the robbery, but he apparently refused to cooperate and again apparently threatened to kill his father when Ronald Sr. asked him about his involvement in the robbery. Although it's unclear how this information is known unless someone heard that conversation, so maybe we take that little bit with a pinch of salt. Like I said, this isn't for me to state what is true or not. I'm merely reporting the available information. Then on November 13th, 1974, at around 3 a.m., Ronnie used a .35 caliber Marlin rifle to kill his family. Evidence showed that all 4 of the children had been shot once, while both parents had been shot twice. They had all been found lying face down in bed, and physical evidence suggested that the mother Louise and 13-year-old Allison had been awake at the time of their deaths. After the killings, Ronnie apparently took a bath and dressed in fresh clothes. He then hid his blood-coloured clothes and the rifle within a pillowcase and disposed of them on his way to work later that morning. Throughout the day, Ronnie then made phone calls to the family home and apparently pretended to be surprised that his father hadn't come into work that day. Later, at around 6:30 p.m, Ronnie ran into Henry's bar, which was located very near to the DeFeo house, and said, quote, "You got to help me, I think my mother and father are shot." Unquote. Initially, Ronnie claimed a mob hitman named Louis Fellini had been responsible, and due to these claims, Ronnie himself was taken into protective custody. But inconsistencies showed up in his interviews, and Fellini had an alibi for the time of the deaths. It was only the next day when Ronnie finally confessed to killing his family. But Ronnie claimed to have heard voices in the house and that they told him to kill his family, with him having no memory of the actual crime itself. His defense lawyer, William Weber, claimed a defense of insanity. On November 21st, 1975, Ronnie DeFeo was found guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder, and on December 4th, he was sentenced to 6 sentences of 25 years to life. He was held at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, New York, until he eventually died March 12, 2021. The DeFeo case is a particularly difficult one to get your head around because Ronnie's story kept changing. Year after year, there would be a new version of events with differing people's involvement. Originally, he had stated the mob hit by Louis Fellini. Then he changed it to hearing voices in the house. But Ronnie later claimed in a 1992 interview that he made up the voices on the advice of his lawyer, William Weber. Weber had apparently told Ronnie that there was the possibility of book and film deals in the future, and the story of hearing voices would make it more financially lucrative. On another occasion, Ronnie claimed he had drugged his family, yet no trace of sedatives was found in the bodies. Another time, DeFeo had asked the police what he needed to do in order to claim his father's life insurance, leading them to wonder if this had been the motive. In an interview in 1986, Ronnie claimed it was actually his sister Dawn who killed their father, with his mother then killing his siblings before he then killed his mother. Then in 1990, Ronnie filed to have his conviction vacated, and this time he claimed that his sister Dawn and an assailant, who had fled the scene before Ronnie could identify them, had killed his parents. And then Dawn killed his siblings alone before Ronnie apparently accidentally killed Dawn while trying to fight over the rifle. Then again in 2000, Ronnie apparently spoke to the author of the book The Night the DeFeos Died, speaking with him for around 6 hours. According to the author, Rick Osuna, Ronnie had told him that he killed his family with his sister Dawn and 2 of their friends. The reason being he believed his parents had plotted to kill him. But then Ronnie would later claim he never actually spoke to Rick Osuna. Instead, he had immediately left the room. Now, due to there being books and many films based off of the Lutz experiences at the house, you'd think that there would be large amounts of information on the real Lutz and their alleged experiences in the house, but there just isn't. It is minimal and general information. Perhaps this is due to multiple lawsuits or an attempt to allow the family some peace, but I'll share what I did find. Again, remembering this is not me saying if it is true or not, merely sharing what information is out there. In reality, the Lutz family did move into the house on Ocean Avenue 1 year after the deaths. They paid a dramatically reduced price of $80,000 for it due to the crime, and they lived at the house for a total of 28 days as stated in the remake. During those 28 days, they experienced strange and inexplainable things such as George apparently waking at 3:15 a.m, the family smelling strange odours, feeling cold drafts, and green slime coming out of walls and keyholes. There are some accounts of Kathy claiming to have levitated off the bed and seen red glowing eyes, while there are other accounts that state George claimed he apparently saw his wife and 2 stepsons levitate off of their beds, as well as seeing a pig with red eyes looking out of a window at him. There was apparently a priest who visited the house to bless it, called Father Pecoraro, but as with Ronnie DeFeo's account of the deaths changing, so did the account of Father Pecораro's involvement with the Lutz and their house. In an affidavit during a lawsuit, he claimed the only contact he'd had with the family was through a phone call. Then there are other accounts of him visiting the house but not experiencing anything unusual. But finally, in an interview in 1979, he claimed that he had entered the house and was apparently slapped by an unseen force and told to get out. As with finding information on the Lutz, it was also difficult to find detailed accounts of the Warrens' involvement in the case, which is interesting because all of the videos and articles I could find all said the same thing, that the Amityville case is the Warrens' most prolific, most famous case, and it's what pushed them into the public eye. What I did find is that they were 2 of 8 investigators who looked into the case, and among the earliest. It also appears as though the Conjuring 2 was right. Lorraine Warren did indeed say that this case haunted them like no other, saying in an interview in 2005, quote, "The case itself has affected our personal lives more than any other case we've ever worked on in 54 years of research." Unquote. One night while visiting the Amityville house, the Warrens took a series of time-lapse photos around the house, and one photo supposedly picked up what they claimed to be an image of a ghost of one of the DeFeo children. This photo is widely considered to be a fake, with some even saying the person in the photo is the Warrens' assistant, a Paul Bratz. Lorraine Warren had apparently taken a relic with her into the house, as well as asking clergy of varying faiths to join her in spirit in the house in order to protect herself. The Warrens apparently believed that the suffering that had occurred on the site of the house had left a negative energy, and that negative energy was then a magnet for demonic spirits and demonic activity. Look, I'm not here to answer that, but while I was researching this episode, I came across lots of disputes over both the DeFeo case and the Lutz alleged hauntings. Both films are based off of the book of the same name released in 1977, which is inspired by accounts of the events from the Lutz family. But there have been numerous disputes over things depicted in the book. Later residents of the house on Ocean Avenue claimed there was no damage to the doors in the house, that they all seemed to be the original ones. Police apparently claimed they were never called to the house, despite the book claiming they were, and the so-called red room in the basement was apparently a closet in the basement and wouldn't have been discovered by but already known to the Lutz family. The local Shinnecock tribe rejected the claim that they had historically used the land the house was built on to bury their dead and abandon their mentally ill. And while there is a person called John Ketchum with ties to Native Americans, he isn't recorded as having lived in Salem or Amityville, and lived a whole century after the films claim he did. What is interesting and blew my mind is that the Lutz family lawyer was none other than William Weber. Remember William Weber? Ronnie DeFeo Jr.'s defense lawyer. In 1977, George and Kathy Lutz filed a lawsuit against him, and in 1979, Weber came out and claimed he knew the book and events were a hoax because he and the Lutz had created the story, quote, over many bottles of wine, unquote. There were multiple claims of the Lutz telling their story for financial gain. However, George and Kathy Lutz both took a polygraph test in June 1979, with them being asked questions relating to the hauntings, and it was reported that the test results didn't indicate lying. Another thing to note is that no other person or family who has lived in the Ocean Avenue house since the Lutz family has claimed to experience anything of the paranormal, and the house is still standing with a family living in it today. But in order to deter tourists and visitors, the address was changed to 108 Ocean Avenue and the iconic windows removed and replaced. And there you have the quote-unquote true story behind the Amityville Horror, the DeFeo case, the Lutz hauntings, and the investigation by the Warrens. I hope you found this interesting. I know I did while I was researching it, if not a little baffling. Honestly, this episode could have been far, far longer, going into minute detail, but I tried to trim it a little bit to make it more digestible. There is minute detail on some areas and very sparse and general information on others. It's an interesting case to look into. Let me know your thoughts on this story, both the films and the real life events. What is your take on it? Do you like the films? Did you know of this case beforehand? I do think it's quite a well-known name, I would say, the Amityville, and I think the image of the windows is quite recognizable and quite iconic. If you're new here, then please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on upcoming content. And if you're curious to know who these names are here on the screen, I always forget which side it is. I think they're here. Then these are the names of my wonderful Patreon members. They are the ones who help the channel as I get lost down the rabbit hole of research. And if you would like to become a Patreon member yourself and enjoy the extra content released there, then I will leave a link in the description box below. But in the meantime, thank you as always for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. Take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Bye.